back into the swing of things regarding lunatics on this channel, I want to take a bit of a side detour into a topic that I think would help not only me, but also you, the viewers, and the naysayers out there. We need to take a look at lunatics from a different perspective. Not one from the view of Warner Brothers or the die-hard Looney Tunes fans, but from the two that ultimately birthed this idea of a futuristic Looney Tunes superhero show. For our second intermission, I think it's time we take a deep dive into the careers of Christian and Yvon Tremblay. Unfortunately, a lot of their early history hasn't been readily documented. The two don't have Wikipedia articles, and their IMDb pages don't list much in terms of personal information, like birth years. What I do know, however, is this. The two were born in Montreal and spent most of their free time in their parents' basement painting, drawing, sculpting, and yes, even animation. In the late 1980s, they started doodling and sketching characters for a show concept that basically boiled down to, what if Top Gun, but cats? For those not in the know, originally airing on September 11th, 1993, SWAT Kats told the story of Jake Clausen and Chance Furlong, two former fighter pilots for Megacat City's military force known as the Enforcers, led by the courageous yet arrogant Ulysses Farrow. Blamed for the destruction of the Enforcers' base, the two are sentenced to work in a junkyard to pay for the damages. Luckily for them, the Enforcers are quite the wasters, as they throw out perfectly good equipment and vehicles on a frequent basis. With their mechanical know-how, the two begin putting all of this junked material to good use, building their own fighter jets and weapons. This spurs them to become vigilante crime fighters, complete with uniforms, secret identities, and a secret base known only to their most trusted outsiders. And just in time too, as Megacat City is about to become face-to-face with a sinister rogues gallery, including the mutated scientific madman, Dr. Viper, the robotic gangsters, the Metallicats, the possessed mad jester, Mad Cat, the skeletal warlock out of time, the Passmaster, and the criminal mastermind known only as Dark Cat. SWAT Kats came out at an interesting time for Hanna-Barbera. Now owned by Turner Broadcasting, the company had begun to focus specifically on shows that could air on Turner's own channels, specifically TBS, TNT, and of course, Cartoon Network. SWAT Kats would base itself on TBS and in syndication, where it would become one of the most successful syndicated shows of 1994. But that didn't exactly mean smooth sailing. Okay, stop me if this sounds familiar. SWAT Kats would be the subject of controversy for many a parent group and Hanna-Barbera superfan who were appalled by the show's more darker and violent tone compared to previous Hanna-Barbera offerings, which were usually for all ages. Doesn't that sound familiar? The show had an actual body count, not just from the Rogues Gallery, but from the SWAT Kats themselves, who only resorted to killing as a last resort. Not something you could say about other shows of its kind at the time. Now that's not to say Hanna-Barbera didn't do these kinds of shows before. The Pirates of Darkwater, a short-lived cartoon on Fox Kids, was Hanna-Barbera's first attempt at a proper, unabashed action cartoon in decades. In fact, one of the company's most famous faces, Johnny Quest, was the catalyst for their line of more pulpy, serious adventure shows that contrasted the likes of Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound. To drive this point home, one of the first shows Hanna-Barbera made after SWAT Kats was a modern reboot of Johnny Quest, now christened The Real Adventures. But in spite of the success and the controversies, the show would meet an unceremonious end when it was cancelled in the middle of Season 2, leaving 3 episodes unfinished. One of the most common and widely believed reasons for the cancellation comes from Ted Turner, who reportedly cancelled it due to his personal dislike of violent and unfamily-friendly cartoons. This claim has been wildly exaggerated. Turner did, in fact, dislike those kinds of cartoons, but he was more referring to the likes of Beavis and Butthead. Turner was unironically fully supportive of SWAT Kats, because it's not like you can just make a violent cartoon under his watch and not have him notice for almost 2 seasons. No, the real reason for its cancellation comes down to a number of factors. While Turner was okay with SWAT Kats going forward, the belief that Turner hated it spread to the executives below Turner's position, and they were the ones that started meddling. When the controversies about the show's content came to light, they ordered the crew to lighten the show up significantly. But here's the problem. This was an expertly crafted show that you couldn't just delay while you censor the hell out of it. That creates a huge money sink. Meanwhile, the planned toy release also got pushed back to clean that up, too. Is it no shock that the 2nd season was unfinished? And even when the toys did come out, they were all redesigned to hell and back, barely even looking like their cartoon counterparts at times. Dark Cat was a cyborg, apparently. But there's one thing to remember. These toys came out in 1994, at the time when there was only one toy line on every boy's mind.
Mastodon!
Pterodactyl!
Triceratops!
Saber-tooth tiger!
Tyrannosaurus!
Power Ranger!
SWAT Kats had to compete with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in the toy aisle, and there was absolutely no contest as to who won that battle. SWAT Kats' final episode aired on Christmas Eve of 1994, with a clip show special airing on January 6th of 1995 as the last new thing from the show. Wow, this show debuted on September 11th and ended on January 6th. I hate that. After that, the show got a Super Nintendo game, then it would move to Cartoon Network, where it would be rerun well into the 90s. It got a few VHS releases here and there before it would get a complete series DVD release in 2010, with a revised edition releasing a few years later in 2012. Over time, it began to develop a solid cult following, which remains strong to this day. And it's funny to think that the Tremblays weren't even Hanna-Barbera regulars. They just crashed into their studios, threw this pitch at them, and Ted Turner, taking a bit of a break from his Captain Planet eye, threw money at it. Typically with these kinds of shows, the creator is someone that has to work their way up the ranks before they can even consider making their own pitch. Like, if you look at some early 80s stuff from Hanna-Barbera, you might recognize a few names in the credits, like Tom Ruegger or Robert Alvarez, before they became really recognizable. Heck, even the likes of Craig McCracken and Jendi Tartakovsky got their starts on SWAT Kats' neighbor, Two Stupid Dogs, well before they got the chance to get the green light to make their own shows. And just as quickly as the Tremblays entered Hanna-Barbera's hallways, they quickly departed, packed up shop, and went back to Canada. And did what it was that they did next.
Mega Babies on Teletoon.
A sophomore slump is best described as when a creator's second outing is considered inferior to their first. This can be due to a number of contributing factors. Maybe their first project was so immensely popular that anything afterwards would be stuck in that project's shadow for years to come. To give an example, after George Romero's surprising cult hit Night of the Living Dead, He followed it up with 1971's There's Always Vanilla, a romantic comedy with no supernatural or horror elements whatsoever. Or maybe it was due to the fact the follow-up was itself followed up by a project that was equally liked as the first, if not liked even more. A Bug's Life, Pixar's second film, is still a really good film, but it was sandwiched in between both Toy Stories 1 and 2, giving it little breathing room for it to flourish on its own terms. And other times, the follow-up just absolutely sucks, making you question if the success of the first project was something of a fluke. Case in point, Josh Trank going from the sleeper hit Chronicle to the utter disaster that was Fan 4-Stick. For the Tremblays, if SWAT Kats was the freshman success, then Mega Babies is not so much a sophomore slump as it is a sophomore fall down a long flight of stairs. Unleashed upon the US and Canada on October 10th, 1999, Mega Babies tells the tale of Meg, Derek, and Buck, 3 infants under the care of Nurse Laszlo at the Perfect Angels Orphanage in Yor City, USA. One day, the 4 are struck by supernatural lightning caused by the planets aligning shortly before the beginning of the new millennium. This, in turn, gives the 3 of them superpowers, while Nurse Laszlo is given the power of enhanced IQ. With these new abilities, they defend their fair city from any— I'm gonna stop right there because I'm not gonna beat around the bush. All of the negativity you've heard from cartoon YouTubers past is true. There's no hidden gem of a show here. This show is bad. Capital B, bad. And I don't need to give this show that epic of a description. It doesn't deserve it. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with the premise of baby superheroes, at least in animated form. But Mega Babies' biggest flaw comes in the form of its humor. Nearly every joke or punchline relies heavily on gross-out toilet humor, be it snot, vomit, farts, or the most prevalent, feces. You know you're in for a bad time when your opening has our 3 protagonists crapping themselves so violently it causes them to burst through the ceiling. Now, to play the slightest of devil's advocate, the 90s were all about gross-out humor. Most of this can be attributed to the runaway success of Ren and Stimpy, which reveled in this kind of humor. But where Ren and Stimpy started the trend in 1991, Mega Babies came out at the tail end of 1999, when this sort of gross-out humor had begun to overstay its welcome, and it mostly stuck around on adult-oriented shows, like Family Guy and any kids show that attempted any sort of gross-out humor as their main shtick would instantly be shunned, and Mega Babies helped effectively prove that that sort of humor didn't appeal to kids anymore. And of course, nowadays, this sort of humor can easily be misconstrued as fetish material. Now, that's not to say anyone on the staff of this show had a fetish for the material, especially the Tremblays. I am not out here trying to kink-shame them. This was just a show that took an admittedly tired brand of humor and exaggerated it to the nth degree. But at the same time, there's a Season 2 episode where the CEO of a diaper company tries to force both kids and adults back into diapers to save his business, and the Season 1 finale has Nurse Laszlo regress back into a baby after a bonk on the head, and she ends up defecating as a result. So Mega Babies would air on Fox Family here in the US, and it seemed right from the word go that Fox really didn't want this show on their channel. Mega Babies would air at 2:30 in the afternoon, a time when most kids were still in school, meaning only those that were either homesick, had a teacher workday, or had inclement weather were able to watch it, even if they wanted to begin with. Season 2 was burned off really quickly over the course of 2 months, airing its last on April 22nd, 2000. If for some ungodly reason you would want to give the show a look, you can easily find all episodes on YouTube. Viewer beware, you're in for a I would best describe Mega Babies as the animated equivalent to Pink Flamingos. Not in terms of that film's more sexual moments. but in terms of how shocking it is to the audience. John Waters once said that people vomiting at the sight of what Divine does at the end of Pink Flamingos is considered a standing ovation to him. It's a challenge to watch the whole film without being nauseated. Hell, some theaters offered free barf bags to moviegoers. Mega Babies, with all the puking, the defecation, and farting, it's begging you to sit through an entire episode while eating something and not throw it back up in the end. It's not a cartoon to enjoy, it's a cartoon to test your nausea tolerance. But that does beg the question, why the hell did the Tremblays even make such a show to begin with? This isn't the kind of show you would attribute to them. This is something a no-name creator who is only known up in Canada would make. It's the kind of show that's lurking in the depths of Tubi's kids section, waiting for an unsuspecting tablet kid to accidentally play an episode to the shock and horror of their parents. It's the show specifically made with Mr. Enter in mind. I, for the life of me, could not find any interviews with the Tremblays about Mega Babies. Oh, what's that? The show's prominently featured on their website? Okay, never mind. Now, at this point of the timeline, I have to point out that I only know of this because there's only one video I could find of either Tremblay actually talking about Loonatics Unleashed.
Like, why was SWAT Kats such a 180-degree different production from Loonatics Unleashed? Was it because you were working with licensed properties that you didn't have full creative control over?
Sometime after production on Mega Babies had wrapped, and the show had aired its final episode, Warner Brothers put out what I believe to be an industry-wide internal memo. This memo said that they were holding an open forum for ideas for new shows in the Looney Tunes franchise that could freshen things up for a new millennium, a post-Space Jam world. It was through this open memo that we got the other two main Looney Tunes projects that aired in the early 2000s. Duck Dodgers, a full-fledged expansion of one of the most famous Looney Tunes shorts ever made, and Baby Looney Tunes. Loonatics would be the third show to come out from this memo, and most importantly, it would be the only one that came from someone outside of the Warner Brothers bubble.
At the end of a meeting, we're doing a meeting, unrelated meeting, and they say, hey, by the way, guys, we want to do something new with Looney Tunes. We don't know what to do. We've asked our own artists. We asked outside artists to come up with something. And if you want to have a pass at it, we'll give you carte blanche. You can come up with something. We thought about it, and literally 2 weeks after that meeting, I called them back and said, set up a meeting. We have it.
Baby Looney Tunes came out because Warner Brothers had this baby-fied merch line called Looney Tunes Lovables, and I guess Sander Schwartz saw them and said, hey, this could be a show. And now this is the show that will not go away. Duck Dodgers was the brainchild of Spike Brandt and Tony Cervone, who were mainstays with Warner Brothers since 1994. And that just leaves Loonatics, the only idea from an outside source. The Tremblays had never crossed paths with Warner up to this point, SWAT Kats being made before Turner merged with Time Warner, and I think there's something to say about the fact that even though Christian and Yvon basically came up with the idea of Loonatics, they were merely hired hands in the grand scheme of things. Yes, they came up with the idea and even presented concept art for how the characters would look, but that's where their general involvement seemingly ended. As shown in the Season 1 retrospective, neither brother wrote, directed, or storyboarded an episode, something that will remain consistent when we get to Season 2. At best, the only things I could find either brother worked on were more pieces of concept art and model sheets after Warner Brothers tasked Walter Gatiss with redesigning the characters after the initial backlash to the Tremblays concept art resulted in that petition. That being said, however, it should be pointed out that the Tremblays were never really considered writers. They were never in the writer's room for either SWAT Kats or Mega Babies. In fact, judging by their IMDb pages, the only other thing these two did for their shows outside of creating them was Christian storyboarding Mega Babies' first episode. Now there is one more show the Tremblays worked on, but we'll get to that a bit later. Now, this is just a personal theory of mine, but I do have some evidence to back my claim up. I personally think the Tremblays were so out of the way when it came to Loonatics, to the point where some people don't even realize they had anything to do with it, because Warner Brothers really didn't want them hanging around. In my initial email discussions with Ron Myrick, he told me point blank that his first introduction to them came from them arguing with studio heads over the direction they wanted Loonatics to go. As mentioned in the prologue to this project, their projected demographic for Loonatics was far older than the demographic Kids WB generally had. As Myrick explained, Warner Brothers wanted their art style, but not their vision.
I've told them at the very one of the biggest meeting we had with them, it's like all the executives there I said, those are jewels of your company, and a lot of eyes going to be on this. So we need to have like the best artists, the best team to work on this. I was very, very clear about that.
Basically what happened was Warner Brothers told them, thanks for the idea, and then they promptly denied them any further creative control. That might sound mean, but you have to remember, these two basically crashed into Warner Brothers HQ, threw this pitch at them, then Sander Schwartz, taking a bit of a break from his baby Looney Tunes high, greenlit it. Wait a minute. Yeah, the Tremblays were basically repeating what they did with SWAT Kats roughly a decade prior. Only this time, this wasn't an original creation. This was someone else's toys they were playing with, and there were added rules to go alongside them. I'm of the personal belief that Warner took a look at the Tremblays' resume and weren't impressed enough to give them further control of the Loonatics project. The Tremblays only had 2 shows under their belt, a controversial yet beloved cult classic, and absolute dog shit. And the dog shit was more recent. Meanwhile, Ron Myrick had been in the animation industry since the late 70s, working on countless shows that helped build up experience. It's important to note that prior to Loonatics, Myrick took over production duties for Baby Looney Tunes' 4th and final season, which is how I believe he got the job of reigning in this new project at Kids WB. Myrick was someone Schwartz knew could handle a unique take on the Looney Tunes property. Now at this point, I should make it perfectly clear that I don't want to come off as me painting Yvon and Christian in a bad light. SWAT Kats is one of my favorite cartoons, and obviously so is Loonatics. But when you put these two under a real microscope, and look at the broad scope of their career, you have to admit they're really just skirting along on the cult popularity of their first work. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but when the only other real show you can say can rival it in terms of style, tone, and setting is one of the most controversial cartoons of the 2000s, it does make it seem like SWAT Kats was the fluke, the one real success these brothers have to claim as their own. Case in point, let's talk about their next show after Loonatics ended, 2011's Neighborhood Life. Now I bet around 99% of you have never heard of Neighborhood Life before, and there's a very good reason why. Once again, this is another Canadian cartoon, so the Tremblays seem to like hopping between the US and Canada. But there's one key difference between Neighborhood Life and Mega Babies. Mega Babies was in English.
Avant de le connaître, je savais pas c'était quoi aimer un outil. Maintenant oui. C'était quoi ta question déjà? C'était comment ça va?
As mentioned previously, Christian and Yvon were born and raised in Montreal, which is in Quebec. And for those who don't know Canadian demography, Quebec is predominantly a French-speaking province.
Oh non!
Vois tes héros se démener du lundi au vendredi dès 6h à Télétoon.
Yes, Neighborhood Life, or untranslated,
Vie de quartier.
was made specifically for a Quebec market. So the entire show is in Canadian French. Originally airing on March 21st, 2011,
Vie de quartier.
tells the story of Dédé Tremblay, an apartment owner whose tenants are a handful, his only friend is a petty criminal, and his apartment building is so shoddily made that it could collapse at any minute. French hijinks ensues, presumably. In case it wasn't obvious by now, I am not French, I am not from Quebec, I have never visited Quebec, and I definitely do not speak or understand French, so I can't properly give my 2 cents on this show. I watched an episode and I could kinda follow along with it despite not knowing what they were saying, but unless this show had an English dub or someone gives this show subs, I can't tell you if the show is actually good or not. It did get 2 seasons, like every other show we've discussed thus far, and it looks decently animated. But other than that,
Vie de quartier.
came and went, and is yet another notch in the Tremblays' belts. And this brings us to their current project, SWAT Kats Revolution. As it turns out, the Tremblays had managed to retain the rights to the SWAT Kats IP ever since the show went off the air. And on July 23rd, 2015, 2 announced to the world that they were launching a Kickstarter to help fund a brand new SWAT Kats series. Not a 3rd season of the original show, but a full-on sequel series. The minimum donation goal they had asked for was $50,000, which it nearly tripled with a grand total of $141,500. This was going to be interesting. It was so exceedingly rare for a creator-driven cartoon to not only remain in the hands of the creators after the show had finished airing, but it was even more rare for the show to be independently brought back on the creators' terms. So everyone that backed the project were eager to hear all of the updates that would soon follow. We got new concept art, backgrounds, teaser images. This was all gonna lead up to something great. And then the updates suddenly stopped. One of the reasons Kickstarter has become such a minefield is because it's sort of a gamble if the creator will actually follow through with the promised end result they had teased. This is doubly true for creators who had been in the industry for literal decades and had chosen to go independent. John Cristofalusi announced a Kickstarter for a new short, and almost everyone who pledged and donated immediately forgot that the dude has a history of always being late and never completing duties on time, leading to a leaked unfinished version as the only way it could be seen before John finally finished it, years after the original Kickstarter went up. Keiji Inafune announced a Kickstarter for a new Mega Man-like game that had way too many generous stretch goals that, in the end, proved to be a very mediocre diet Mega Man clone that was ruined by a botched marketing campaign and Inafune's shady history coming to light. Butch Hartman announced a Kickstarter for a brand new streaming service specifically made with families in mind, which did get funded, and then never got made because boy, does Butch have a ton of skeletons in his closet. It wouldn't be until 2022, 7 years after the SWAT Kats Kickstarter was successfully funded, when the Tremblays admitted that their project had hit a major snag. All of the backers, the concept art, the pitches, and money in the world. All of that doesn't matter if no one wants your project in the first place. No network or streaming service wanted this show. Cartoon Network, Disney, Nickelodeon, Netflix, Paramount Plus, Peacock, Amazon, HBO Max, Tubi, Crackle, Vudu, they all said no. Imagine for a moment that you're this up-and-coming creator. You've come up with this amazing idea for a show. You've got the whole story mapped out in your mind. You've written up the series Bible. You have concept art of all the characters, and if you're really dedicated, you've already storyboarded the pilot. Now imagine going to every major network in Hollywood, pitching this show you've worked on so hard to bring to fruition, and when you finally finish your pitch, they tell you no. Every single network hears your pitch, and they tell you they're not interested. Maybe in a cruel twist of fate, they try suggesting another network that has already turned you down. Congratulations, that's what the Tremblays did for 7 years. Thankfully, also in 2022, they announced that they had been looking into foreign markets and had finally managed to find a partner to bring this show to life. Toons Media Group, an animation studio in India. Now, if you've been on the internet as long as I have, you'll know that India's animation history is weird. When most people think of Indian animation, they'll likely turn to the first generation of Elsagate kids content. Your Spider-Man and Elsas, your Finger Families, and your Johnny Yes Papas. The only full-on animated series that I know of that originates from India is Kimon Ache. Kimon Ache was this weird show on Nickelodeon India that was, by and large, a Doraemon ripoff. Instead of a magic cat from the future that uses gadgets to solve everyday problems, it's a sentient blue monkey backpack that wants to be a DJ. I could go further in depth with India's weird obsession with Fujiko Fujio's works, but I don't want to get sidetracked. Updates have been slow, but at the very least consistent. The Tremblays have since been on the convention circuit to help hype up the show, so it's still in development, but how far along it is hasn't been publicly shared. To help stall for time, a second Kickstarter was announced to launch a SWAT Kats comic book, which not only met its goal rather quickly, it blew through most of the stretch goals it had set up, including turning it into a motion comic that would be voiced by the original cast. So while the new animated series is still seemingly years off from an actual release, at least the Tremblays are working on supplemental material to tide us over. And you'd think this is where I'd be ending things, since we've tracked their careers from beginning to right now. But look at how much left of this video there is. We've only scratched the surface. For you see, for all of the shows we talked about thus far, there's one thing in common all of these shows share. SWAT Kats, Mega Babies, Loonatics,
Vie de quartier.
They all share one simple fact. They all made it to air. Guys, gals, and non-binary pals, we're about to dive into a side of the Tremblays that some of you are probably familiar with. But for the rest of you, it's time we talk about the Tremblay projects that never got picked up. On the official Tremblay Brothers website, you're immediately met with a slew of characters that you've probably never seen before. Scroll down and you immediately start to see what I'm talking about. A mix of familiar and unfamiliar, stuff that you recognize, but at the same time not. These are all the projects and concepts that the Tremblays were kicking around while the shows that did get through were in production. So let's go through them one by one. I'm not going in any particular order, I'm just going off what I see. Constantine. I don't know exactly when this was pitched, but I'm definitely getting Invader Zim vibes. According to this promo pic, this was going to air on YTV and be animated in cooperation with the Philippe Monnier marketing production, an animated studio whose only recognizable work I could see is the CITV cartoon known as Dr. Zitbag's Transylvania Pet Shop. Rolls right off the tongue. Constantine doesn't show up anywhere on PMMP's resume, and YTV doesn't have any record of the show either, so I'm assuming it did not get picked up. The Mask Reanimated. Okay, so this one probably happened around the same time as Loonatics, because holy crap, this looks so similar. Stanley has that sort of art style the original Loonatics designs have, the font that the show uses is reused here, and yeah, that's definitely a Tremblay Brothers font. Okay, quick side ramble. The Tremblays definitely seem to have a specific kind of font they like using. Lengthy, elongated, and sharp edges on parts of the letters that resemble what you'd see in a middle schooler's notebook who likes Evanescence way more than he probably should. It's probably the first thing that jumps out at you. This has it, Loonatics has it, Constantine kinda has it, even Mega Babies has it. If there was one aspect of Mega Babies you could easily identify as being a Tremblay Brothers joint, it's the logo. Back to Mask Reanimated, I feel like their more violent and darker style definitely would have fit the Mask much better than Looney Tunes. The Mask comics were already dark, crazy, and shockingly gory at times, something that both the movies and animated series toned down significantly. A Mask cartoon that was more faithful to the comics, that had the Tremblays on board, would have easily been a match made in heaven. Given the time frame, I'd guess either New Line decided to either go with Son of the Mask instead, or the absolute failure of that movie made New Line apprehensive, and the Mask franchise was essentially put on ice. Oh well. Edward. He's a bug, He's got the morning paper, he's got his coffee, he's getting all philosophical on my ass, and he's coming to Teletoon. Yep, that's Edward. Moving on. Spyro Revolution. This is, to my knowledge, the one with the most known presence online, because I know I am not the only one to have noticed that this was here. The facts are thus. In 2006, the rights to Spyro were now in the hands of Vivendi Universal, and Vivendi wanted to have their own unique mark on the franchise, so we got the Legend of Spyro trilogy, published by... Oh, I'll talk about you someday. So during this time, Vivendi started to get ambitious with the property, so they decided to turn Spyro into a multimedia franchise, with an animated movie and, if this concept art is to be believed, an animated series. Oh, wait, sorry, hang on, I'm getting word. I meant 2 animated series. Hunter, the Cheetah Warrior, a spin-off of a spin-off, focusing on Hunter the Cheetah. Now, I'm not gonna lie, out of all the concepts the Tremblays have listed on their website, this is easily the best one from an artistic perspective. All of the concept art for these shows look amazing, and it's a damn shame this didn't get anywhere. Both Spyro and Hunter's projects were cancelled in 2008 when Vivendi was acquired by Activision. Because as we all know, nothing good comes from Activision acquiring you. At the end of the day, Christian and Yvon Tremblay are highly ambitious and show a lot of artistic talent, but in the grand scheme of things, they set the bar admittedly way too high, as every show after SWAT Kats ultimately fell short, weren't fully appreciated enough to be just as popular, or was mega babies. And when they weren't trying to branch away from SWAT Kats with other shows, they were coming up with pitch after pitch after pitch, in the hopes of getting something else out the door, but were either met with rejections or had outside forces cause their pitch to get dropped. And now they've ultimately resigned to sticking with the show that put them on the map. I don't mean to sound rude, again, but the Tremblays are the animated equivalent of a one-hit wonder who managed to top the charts, tried and failed to make follow-up albums, and now they only cater to fans with just that one song. You can try and make other shows, but in the end, the Tremblays will forever be only known as the creators of SWAT Kats, and I think they're okay with that.